Hello, welcome to tonight's Speak event focused on technology and screens during COVID. My name is Shelley Luke Willie. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm coming to you from Children's Day School in San Francisco, California, which is located on unceded Ohlone land. I could not start tonight without mentioning our solidarity with our Asian American community. As we witness a year of increased violence, we must all work together to actively stop hate. As I was getting excited about tonight's panel, I was reflecting on how important technology has been to all of us this past year. Rapid advancements in technology have actually been critical to our survival. Recent innovation allowed educators to move to distance learning, scientists to rapidly create vaccine and COVID tests, and families to stay connected, continue their livelihoods, and get essentials in new ways. Easy, necessary access has also provided us opportunities to rethink family technology use, which is why we are here tonight. Thank you to Speak for providing this opportunity for adult learning, to Haley for running the back end behind the scenes work with our tech. Now it is my pleasure to turn us over to Danielle Ramo, a clinical psychologist, Speak board member, and most importantly, a CDS parent. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Shelley. And everyone, welcome to Speak, a series of outstanding talks to enrich the education and learning experiences of San Francisco families. Tonight, we're going to talk about kids and technology in the era of COVID. Over 1,000 people have registered for this event. So if this topic is at the forefront of your mind, you're not alone. We'll be having a discussion among leading experts in children's digital media use and mental health, and then we will answer your questions. Please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of this webinar, and we will get to as many as we can live. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. Dr. Catherine Steiner-Adair is a clinical psychologist, author, speaker, and consultant. Since the 2013 publication of her award-winning book, The Big Disconnect, Protecting Childhood and Family Relationships in the Digital Age, Dr. Steiner-Adair has consulted internationally to help schools, parents, government agencies, corporations, and health professionals strengthen the psychological health and well-being of students and minimize the fallout that tech poses at each stage of development. She sits on the board of the Hamlin School, a Speak school, and many of us have enjoyed her presentations at our own Speak schools and through the Parents in Place speaker series this year. Next, we also have with us Dr. Michael Rich. He's Associate Professor of Pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. He's Associate Professor of Social and Behavioral Sciences at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and he practices adolescent medicine at Boston Children's Hospital. Pediatrician, researcher, father, and filmmaker, Dr. Rich is the founder and director of the Digital Wellness Lab and the first evidence-based medical program addressing physical, mental, and social health issues associated with digital technology use, called the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders. As the mediatrician, Dr. Rich offers research-based, balanced, and practical answers to our questions about children's media use and the positive and negative implications for their health and development. I'm Danielle Ramo Larios, clinical psychologist, adjunct faculty in psychiatry at UC San Francisco, and senior director of research at Hope Lab, a social innovation lab that builds behavior change tech to support teen and young adult mental health. I've spent my career researching, writing, and speaking about the intersection of adolescence, technology, substance use, and mental health. I'm also the mom of 3 kids who have all gone to CDS, as Shelley said, and this year I am a proud board member of Speak. I'm dealing with technology opportunities and challenges acutely every single day in my home, and I'm dying to hear how these experts see this unprecedented time in the era of kids and tech. So let's dive in. Catherine, Michael, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
On March 5th, Heather Kelly wrote in an article for the Washington Post, A year of everyone turning to technology has shown us that the worth or danger of devices has less to do with the glowing screens themselves and more to do with how they're used. What appears to matter most is the support systems that children and their parents have available to them. Here we are, a year into the pandemic. Many of us have seen the social dilemma this year and are aware of the dangers that technology poses en masse. Yet, regardless of how we started a year ago, our kids are spending an inordinate amount of time using technology right now. What can you two tell us about the state of kids and screens? What does appear to matter most? Catherine, let's start with you.
Well, what matters most is the quality of connections in children's lives. And thank God we have screens to help them connect to their teachers, their friends, their families, and most of all, to a caring adult at home. And when we look at the research on what helps kids get through a pandemic or a war or a traumatic situation, the single most thing that comes through clearly is a adult who is consistently, as much as we can be, because it's really hard to be, kind of calm and upbeat, caring and curious about how their kid is doing. You know, in the Blitz, it was the kids whose parents said to themselves quietly, oh my gosh, there's the siren, but to their kids said, okay guys, grab your books, we're going down into the basement, thank goodness we have it, and we'll be warm, and get your slippers, hiding all the other thoughts they were thinking. So, you know, when it comes to screen time, we would be lost without it right now. We should be so grateful because it is now the social world for children. It is fabulous for families. We are now planning our second Seder on Zoom, never having imagined we would be doing this for so long. But the thing to realize is that when we can't really talk about screen time as a monolithic thing. It's what's the purpose of why your kids are on screens? Who are they connecting with? What's the quality of the content? Is it pro-social? Is it anti-social? Is it purposeful? Is it spurning creativity? Is it, you know, helping them learn new things? These are all wonderful things, and not to worry so much if that's what your children are doing, because our lives have been transported to screens, and it is not necessarily a bad thing at all. And in many ways, it can be a life-saving thing.
Thank you, Catherine. And Michael, what's your take on what matters most? You're muted.
First, I want to reassure parents that their worries about screen time limits should be put away. I think that the screen time limits that came out of my organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, now some 22 years ago, about limiting to 1 to 2 hours of quality educational screen time a day, was from the era of television, which was purely receptive screens. And what has happened is that that's kind of gotten ingrained in people, and they were not able to observe it even then, but they just felt guilty about it. And we have to put the guilt aside and put our energy into connecting with our kids and being very real. And I totally agree with Catherine that this is the important issue here is what they're doing on the screens and the context in which they are doing it. And I think that one of the things that we have to be conscious of is that connectivity is not connectedness. And that when we are staring at our screens and we're trying to have a conversation with our child, or our child is pulling at our sleeve, we are not there for them. And so we have to really make sure that with this near infinite connectivity, we're not actually using these screens that could connect us more with each other, and often do, but to come between us and to distance us from each other. And so one of the things I mentioned to parents is instead of trying to develop a killer app, we should develop our killer bees. And there are 3 of them. One of them is be mindful in our media use. Use the screens for what they do well. When they don't do the job at hand well, put them aside. Be balanced. Make sure that we have a rich and diverse menu of experience for our children and ourselves. And that can include screens, and has been even more so during the pandemic. And most importantly, be present. Be present for your child. Don't be off in Facebook when she's trying to show you a painting she just made. So I think that if we can maintain our killer bees, we will do very well with our kids. And quite frankly, I do have to report that a recent Pulse survey we did literally last week found that most parents have been very happy with the quality of the remote schooling that they've had. The one place that they worry is that the kids' social skills have not developed. Their social emotional learning has not developed as well as it had in in-person school. And I think that's something we need to pay attention to.
Thank you both for having a realistic perspective and highlighting that this time brings with it both clear challenges as well as a lifeline that technology has provided for so many of us. One of the challenges that I'm thinking about as you spoke, Michael, is the fact that I used to be able to separate my screen time from my walk with my son to school in the morning, and I would be mindfully attentive to him. And then as soon as I dropped him off, I could jump on the phone and start working. And with the absence of a commute, I'm not wishing for more commute, that boundary between the time I spend with him and the time I'm on a screen is very permeable. And so I have to be much more purposeful about how I handle that. And maybe that's what you both are asking that parents do right now. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'd like to talk about what the literature is calling digital technology overuse. So I'm not using the term screen time on purpose, but it's the effects of this massive technology use that everyone's having, and recognizing that technology can be different for some kids than for others. And it's kind of easy to take the guilt out of this situation, and we all want to do that. But let's also recognize that for some kids, it's really harder for them and harder for their families for them to be in front of a screen. So, Michael, can you talk about this explicitly from your experience running the Center for Families who have been struggling with this? What does it look like?
Well, absolutely. First of all, you're dead on correct with the research that kids have differential susceptibility. That there are some kids who have a harder time with screens, but there are also some kids who are unbelievably masterful at screens and handle it very well. And so the first and most important thing in parenting a child in their digital space is observe them, listen to them, see what's going on, see what's happening in their head, and interact with them on what's going on in the screen. And one of the things that parents often fall into is police work. You know, they police their child. Oh, you've been on too long, or you haven't done homework, or I hate Grand Theft Auto. Can't you, stop playing that? And what I urge them to do is actually to take a moment, sit down next to their kid, and play Grand Theft Auto with them. And they're horrified when I suggest that, absolutely horrified. And I reassure them.
Slightly horrified.
Yes, but I reassure them that they will never beat their child. Their child will always beat them. But here's the thing. When you do that, you are saying, I love you, I respect you, I want to understand what engages you here. And then after you finally figure out how to steal cars, and you turn to them and say, okay, I finally figured this out. Now let's talk a little bit about why you might want to do this for fun and rehearse it over and over again. You are talking from a very different place. You are bringing your mature executive functions to bear on something that they have yet to master. And you're not coming in a shaming or reprimanding way, but you're coming in a, I want to understand way.
I really appreciate that. A lens of curiosity. Catherine, can you tell us from your perspective as a clinical psychologist, a parent, what does it look like in those families for whom technology is more connected? What challenges have you seen?
Well, I think the challenge I hear from my research with kids all across the country, from 4-year-olds to 30-year-olds, is their first challenge is their parents' digital distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And the phrase kids hate the most is just a sec, or just checking. And what we forget as grown-ups is that our smartphones are fully loaded computers that are neurological stimulants to our brains, and we love stimulants. As a species, we just love our stimulants. And at the sound of that ping, we grab the phone and forget. We just asked our 8-year-old or 18-year-old, yeah, how'd you do on your test? How was school today, honey? How are you getting along with your roommate? You know, all these important questions. And suddenly we're in a conversation with someone who's not even physically present in the room. So earlier you talked about, you know, the distraction you experienced, Danielle. I think one of the things that's very important, because we're all on these devices, every one of us throughout the day, we've lost the boundaries. I mean, technology lost the boundary between home and work when it first came out, because you walk in the door on your phone and you're not leaving the office behind, you're walking in the house. So it's very important to punctuate and have boundaries. And I think kids do well when they know that there are certain times in the day that their parents will be completely screen free. And what the research tells us is just having your phone on the desk or on the dinner table will distract you. And when you have your phone in your hand and your kid's asking for homework, they know you're also kind of, the siren call of the screen might be pulling your attention away. So mealtime, no technology within reach. Some families have created, like, you know, certain, like in the living room or the place where people hang out, let's just have some screen-free time here. So whether you're reading a book or playing Sorry or just, you know, doing whatever, you're not going to have that experience of people picking up a phone, picking up an iPad, because these devices are contagious. So once one person reaches for it, the other person does. And you want to protect those walks with your kids. And kids do well with a schedule. So if they know in the morning you will be screen free until they are plugged in themselves, and you'll have a break with them. And at lunchtime, you'll be with them. And then again, later on in the afternoon, help them. And at dinner time. And the other thing that's really important for children is at the end of the day, for their parents to really be present to help them make that transition to the land of Nod. That is a really critical thing. And we've seen kids having a harder time sleep during the pandemic. So, you know, that's really important, regardless of how old your kids are. And for kids in those families, what's so hard is that you feel guilty if your children are on devices all the time. But I will, say there are many times where my kids watched the same movie, not once, but twice in the same afternoon, because I needed to get something done. So as long as you know what they're watching, cut yourself some slack, because we are all under one roof and it's really hard right now. As long as you're on top of the content and you are very good about protecting playtime, talk time, screen-free time.
Thank you
I
both
realized
for.
I never answered your question, Danielle, about
Okay, go ahead.
overuse. I apologize.
I was interested, you run a clinic for families that struggle with overuse. And I think it is probably fair to say, just like with addiction to some other things, that there are some families and some kids that have that combination of exposure and brain wiring that makes screens more enticing than for others. And so what if one of us has one of those kids, or we are that family?
Absolutely. And those kids do exist. But one of the things that I will say is, first of all, we are all subject to the algorithms that are built into games and social media to keep us going. B.F. Skinner talked about, variable reward systems, and these are built into variable rewards are built into gaming. They frustrate you just enough, and then they reward you by making it a little harder and going to another level. Same thing with social media and likes, and on and on. So we have to understand that the environment we're going into, the digital environment, is actually engineered to keep grabbing our attention, to keep pulling us back in, not necessarily to hold it, but to keep jumping on it. And what overuse looks like is very interesting. Catherine brought up the fact that these behaviors of walking in the door, holding your smartphone and staring at it, pre-existed the pandemic. But what the pandemic has done is accelerated and amplified the effects. In medicine, we call this acute on chronic, as if someone with asthma gets pneumonia. So you have a pre-existing issue that just gets accelerated. In addition, now that parents or kids are all under one roof, parents are actually seeing what their kids are doing during the day. And they're going, OMG, you know, what's going on here? But I will say that overuse is something we have to define very carefully. It is not measured in hours, as we've already talked about. It is really measured in when these behaviors are impairing vital functions for the child. And I include in that sleep, spending time with family, a sit-down family meal without devices every day, getting outside and getting some physical activity. And we need that rich and diverse menu of experience. We need all of that. And I will say, one of the positive things that I've seen during the pandemic is that kids who, before this, would race home from school and get in front of the screen to play Fortnite or whatever, even if they had screen time limits, saw the screen as their playground. Now they're spending 5 or 6 hours a day staring at the screen, learning math and science and English, etc. And at the end of the day, they are just as likely, if not more likely, to close the device and say, I want to go out and ride my bicycle or shoot hoops. So they have, just by force of history, come to recognize these very powerful tools as just that, not as toys. That being said, many of the kids, essentially, actually all of the kids that we have seen, do not fit the criteria for addiction. They are not physiologically changed in the use of the device, nor is there a withdrawal, a physiologic withdrawal when they get off it. There certainly are behavioral changes, but not physiologic ones. And interestingly, we have yet to run across a kid, after seeing hundreds of kids, some of whom were very impaired by problematic interactive media use, who didn't have an underlying issue that was driving these behaviors, like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, anxiety disorders of various kinds. And when we treat that underlying condition, the behaviors lessen and often disappear completely.
That resonates a lot with me as a substance abuse researcher for most of my career. There are often other things going on, and when the whole person is attended to, it really can help families thrive. Thank you so much. So you both have talked about ways that technology has been a social lifeline for families in various comments you've made. And I'd love to drill down into that a little bit. During the pandemic, a lot of our kids were getting actually almost their entire social worlds beyond the folks under their roofs online, whether it was in school, in breakout rooms, sometimes in video game servers, and maybe some of media. And can you tell us what it is we know about the importance of social connections to child development and how you see technology playing a role in this at this particular time? And Catherine, I'll come to you first with this.
Well, social emotional intelligence and social emotional development is one of the most essential aspects of child development. Learning your emotions, learning how to express your emotions, self-regulation, handling frustration, being able to play well with others, knowing how to be an upstander. So children learn this at school, and they learn it at home, and they learn it at camp, and they learn it from reading good literature. So there are many ways in which we nourish kids' social emotional intelligence. And honestly, if you look at some of the research on who really is most successful in life, social emotional intelligence comes up as if not the most important thing, certainly right at the top, right? More important than where your kid goes to college or their GPA or their SATs or any of that stuff that's our narrow definition of success. So what we know from different kinds of social interactions during the pandemic is some are better than others. So, anything that's pro-social, that's upbeat, that's not hurting somebody's self-esteem, obviously is good. Some of the social media sites are designed to not only grab your attention, but to sort of lure you into nasty stuff. And that's really challenging. And they're like sites like Snap. We've known way before the pandemic when you're anonymous, people will take risks, not the cool risks that they're taking in your schools, but they will take risks with social cruelty. So we have to be really careful to talk about your kids and observe them. Gee, you look really unhappy. You were just online for a while. Were you on Insta? What was going on? Did you see something upsetting? You want to watch your children, say, how did that make you feel? So that they can reflect with you back on the impact psychologically on them of the social media. One of the things that I see kids and grown-ups getting into trouble with the most in terms of these devices is texting. Because texting eliminates the two most essential tools for human communication and relationships. And that is the first one. And when I talk to kids, like eight-year-olds get this. What's missing in texting? Tone of voice. That's right. Because I can be in a fight with my friend, type SORRY, and it can be snarky, sorry, or it could be, oh, I'm really sorry. The other thing that's missing, and this is so important, is understanding the impact of your words on the other person. And of course, when we are on sites not like FaceTime or Zoom like this, and we can't see that, we don't know how our words are landing. So what we want to make sure is that kids are developing their social emotional tools as much as possible during the pandemic. And with little kids, parents can stand in pretty well for that. We have seen a spike in some areas of social anxiety. Some people are concerned that there's going to be more social anxiety going back to school for a small group of kids. The same kids who are slow to warm or have a hard time going back to school after the summer. The other thing that we will probably or want to be concerned about is just sort of reading social cues again and being with a group of people when you are still maybe anxious or dealing with some leftover residual fear about physical closeness to people and COVID. So there are some kids for whom it's going to be challenging, but any ways in which we can support kids' social development is absolutely essential and critical.
Is it fair to say that you would recommend that families kind of connect with and know their kids around their comfort level in coming back, be aware of our own comfort level in coming back into the world, and ease in if necessary? So gently encouraging kids to have in-person play dates, for example, but also recognize that they might still have an urge to talk with a friend online and that might not be the end of the world. Is that fair to say?
It's absolutely not the end of the world if they want to talk to a friend online. I mean, I am a fan right now of if you've got, a sixth, seventh, a fifth grader, whatever, who wants to do their homework and have their friend on the Zoom screen on their bed, and they're just chatting while they're doing homework, like a sleepover sort of, or a sibling thing. To me, that is a good use of screens right now, because it's letting kids feel connected to their peers. And one of the biggest costs of this has been the loss of the social peer interaction, the social isolation, both from their teachers and their peers. So any ways we can do that. What is going to be more challenging is getting some of those kids to feel like it's safe to run and play, to join up. So you'll see some tentative kids. And yes, small bites, small steps, exposure is what we call it in psychology, little teeny steps for your kids who are anxious, and help them understand that they can be fully in their skins and themselves and be playful and trusting with other people. Because what we have had to teach them is to pull back and to feel protective and to distance themselves. So it's an unlearning that they're going to need some encouragement to do. Some kids will have absolutely no trouble with this at all. And don't be surprised if your kids do have some anxiety, don't sleep as well before they go back to school. Some of you have seen this already in the hybrid switching back and forth.
Yeah. Some of us may be worried that there's a generation of kids who are going to be afraid to hug people or to touch people. And maybe what you're saying is that we just might need to ease in, and our kids might just
Really
1 minute.
I don't think that's going to happen. You know, I
Right.
really don't. Kids miss a year of school with illness. Kids are it is not out of the norm of, human experience for children to miss school, and they will catch up. They are social creatures. It might take a little longer, but I would not worry about that. Like the worries that we're carrying about what will it be like, are causing understandable anxiety. But I think kids are so resilient, and they are naturally wanting to play. They're like little puppies, most of them. They just want to tumble and play and have friends. And if they're a little tentative at first, don't worry about it. They will grow back into their social selves.
That's great. Thank you.
I need
And
to
Michael,
argue with
how do you see
Catherine.
screens? Yeah, go
How I see
ahead.
screens. I need to argue a little bit with Catherine. I
I love it.
totally agree with her that it is really important to understand, first of all, that our worries are almost invariably far worse than the children's worries are. And that we've got to be careful not to project that on them and make them afraid because we're afraid, for starters. But one of the points that sort of jumped out at me was your description of doing homework while having a friend on a screen at the same time. And I think that's fine as long as you don't expect that the quality of that friend interaction and the quality of the homework will be as good as if they were doing it as a monotask. We have created this illusion that we can multitask. The human brain is incapable of multitasking. The human brain thinks one thing at a time. We have single channel brains. What we are doing in that case is something called switch tasking. We are jumping from one thing to the other. We're not hearing everything your friend is saying, and we're not paying attention to the English paper we're writing fully. Research has shown this. We've taken students at Stanford and MIT who are arguably pretty smart and thoroughly convinced they could multitask, and had them do their homework as a monotask, and then had them do it with, a screen on, with texting happening, with even music on. And what happens is that all those other activities take cognitive energy, take cognitive focus away. And the time it takes them to complete the work is longer. Their mistakes go up, and what goes way up is their poor retention of the material. They don't retain it because they're not thinking deeply and reflecting on it. They are bouncing to the next thing.
Yeah, so Michael, let's get real about how that's playing out right now, right? We are all parents of K-8 students who are digitally connected on the days that they are not in school in person, right? And I've experienced this in my home. I've heard so many of my friends talk about it. Kids are on multiple screens at the same time, right? Their attention is being pulled in different directions in an entirely unprecedented way. How should parents be talking about this with their kids? How should we manage it when it comes up? What do you recommend?
Well, sorry, go ahead.
The reason I was talking about that homework example is actually I just did a consultation with a kid who was feeling so isolated, and that was the thing that came up. That was the way she would feel comfortable, actually, because she was doing something else. So you're absolutely right, Michael. In fact, one of the things I feel really strongly about is that there are some circumstances in which you have to really set clear limits. The biggest things I try and teach kids, and the way I deal with this, Danielle, is when I work with kids, I teach them about their brain on screens. Just like Michael said, you cannot multitask, it's a myth. And we know that a phone, your children in a K-8 school do not need to have their smartphone with them or on them or in their room when they're doing homework.
And many of them, at all.
Right. Yes, we can have that debate too, the wait till late debate. But the point is that tech health and well-being is something we need to teach kids. And we need to teach it to them very early. And they get it when we give them the research, because they recognize it in themselves and they recognize it in their parents. And by the time children get to middle school, the way I like to work with them is to say, look, you're the boss of your brain. And right now, one of the most important, exciting capacities you have and you need to develop, and it's like a muscle, and if you don't develop it, you're not going to have it as much as you could. And it's so important. And that's your capacity for deep focus, singular attention, and developing the capacity to stay on task when it's frustrating and boring and hard, and not just check in stuff. And you're not going to develop that muscle and that brilliant capacity that your brain has if you are constantly on 2 or 3 screens at a time. And by the time a kid is in high school, it's really hard to set good limits. Some kids will obey with your limits. Some kids will do deep dives around you. So it makes it very important, K through 8, to have conversations about what's okay, what this device is for, when we are only doing homework, when we can socialize with other people, when we're on one screen, etc. So I think that teaching children about the ways in which their brains either function well or not at all is really important. The problem is when the reason kids say, I can do my homework and I can text and I can check my posse or whatever it is because the stimulant of being on 3 devices is energizing. And it gives you a false sense of being in control, that you can do all this stuff. And it can be exciting, but exhausting. And as Michael said, your short-term memory, your long-term memory, your ability to do well on the test tomorrow, your ability to do well on the test at the end of the semester, all goes down. And so I think that's really important. What I was going back to and talking about having a friend quietly on the Zoom screen while you're there, so you got these 2 girls, is that the isolation, the loneliness for some kids has been really intense. So if it's a sense of like parallel play, like just having a sense that there's somebody who cares about you while you are quietly doing your work, that's the kind of thing I'm saying that I think is really okay. But I'm one of the things I really encourage parents to do and schools to do more of, and I think schools are doing more of this, is teaching not just digital citizenship, which is so important, but digital health and digital well-being, like no screens in the bedroom. So important, such a simple one, but so critical.
Great, thank you. And Michael, did you want to talk about the dividing of attention, multiple screens, the pull for that right now, and how parents can handle that in our homes?
Sure. Well, as you originally asked the question, you said the kids are at school with multiple screens open. The first thing I would do if a child is multiple screens open and they're all for school is talk to the teacher and explain to the teacher that they can't multitask. But
to be clear, what I might happen to notice in my home, I'm happy to use my own example, is that the second screen is not for school.
Exactly.
It is found somewhere and sneaking, reading a book or something. Parents are seeing things like we never have before.
Well, and that's what I'm saying, that the pandemic has brought back. That might be happening certainly in school, but we don't see it happening. The number of teachers in middle schools and high schools that have said to me about their students who randomly smile at their knees in class because they've got their phone down under the desk. So it may be happening anyway, but what I'm absolutely hold to is that one screen alone needs to be open. So the recommendations I usually make are, first of all, that the child have a dedicated place in the house that is their schoolwork place, where they do their synchronous classes, where they do their asynchronous projects, where they do their homework. And even if they use the same device to play on, they do it somewhere else in the house. So when they are working, they're dedicated to working. Secondly, no second screens, and those need to go away. And that would be, something parents can keep an eye on, or just have the kids turn their phones over at the beginning of the school day and get them back at the end of the school day, something like that. And I do think that we have to be conscious of the fact that as Catherine was saying, we, socialize online. And one of the interesting things that our research showed is that while parents felt that the education part, the learning, the transfer of information part was working well, they felt that the social emotional learning was not going well. And what we are seeing is that the schools have done quite a good job at figuring out how to teach on screen. They've not really had the time or focus or bandwidth, frankly, to work on the social emotional piece very well. What has happened is that kids have migrated to Roblox, to Minecraft, to Fortnite, and that's where they interact with their friends. And when I talk to kids about, say, Fortnite, they don't talk about it as a game. They don't talk about it as something that you can win or lose. And they don't talk about the fact that it's a first-person shooter. They talk about it as hanging out with my friends. And so these spaces have become the equivalent of sandlot baseball, which was never about, getting into the major leagues. It was about arguing about whether you're out or safe. It was about developing those social emotional skills. So I think we have to understand that what's going on there is not necessarily all bad, but it is unmonitored and it is unsupervised. Whereas the social emotional learning that happens in school is more structured and certainly more supervised.
So, okay, my turn to disagree with you.
Please, please do it. And also you said the F word, Fortnite. There's a lot, questions are flooding in about Fortnite explicitly and violent video games, and it's okay to go there now. So Catherine, please go ahead.
What I just want to say quickly is that I have seen schools, and some of them are your schools in the SF Speaks cohort, do an extraordinary job tuning into the social emotional needs of children and putting SEL check-ins at the beginning of every class and exit tickets and check-ins when they're going out and redesigning advisory and the teachers have done such an unbelievable job, especially the teachers who have children of their own at home, really trying to tune into the social and emotional needs of kids, prioritizing them and lifting them up. So I just want to say that I have been really impressed by the efforts to push to the max the possibility of using these tools, which are not classrooms. Teaching is the most visceral, highly relational, reading social cues kind of work. And I think that there's no way it can replace the classroom, but I think that schools are realizing and really prioritizing even more the social and emotional needs of kids in the allocation of time. What was your question, Danielle?
Well, we're going to get there. I did want, why don't we just go there now? It's so important, and we're going to get there in the Q&A anyway. And Michael mentioned Fortnite in particular, and I just want to ask you, Catherine, do you have thoughts about Fortnite in particular, the violence in video games, and when the baseball field becomes, it's not a baseball game that they're playing online, it's something else? How can parents navigate this?
You can read different research on the impact of Fortnite and Grand Theft Auto and violence in video games. I think overexposure does desensitize kids, but I think that there are some things that are really hard and frightening for parents. You don't know who's in your kid's posse. You don't know the language. You don't know the put downs. You don't know the people they're being exposed to. So I think the challenge, and some of it's really not good. And we know that we don't want kids to be desensitized or exposed to more hate, racism, etc. So the first thing is to try and get a sense of and see if it's at all possible, depending on what game it is, who's in the posse, who's playing. And then to really, as Michael said earlier, listen, sit down, watch, randomly drop in on their games. But it's still very hard to control. I think the thing that's also really important is watch your child as they come off the game. because that's where you're going to see a lot of how dysregulated they are, how revved up they are, if the quality of their meltdowns. That will tell you how you want to put some, how you want to work with that kid around how much gaming they should do, when they should do it. Should it be something during the week? Should it only be something they do on the weekend? There are some kids who can go on and off those games really evenly, some who can't. But the thing that the two things I guess I would say is, when you feel out of control in a pandemic and you're a kid and you're socially isolated, and first you love gaming and you love the thrill of gaming and you love the power and the high of gaming for all the wrong reasons of the algorithms and the way the games are designed to keep them engaged and rev them up, etc. I think you really have to be pretty understanding about why the power of these games and why they are so utterly compelling to kids. And at their best, we see kids helping each other out, socializing well, giving each other cheats in Fortnite, working it together in ways that are really good. And at their worst, we see, I have talked to kids who've really taken some hard blows to their self-esteem, their sense of mattering, their sense of being valued, have been really had some very hard experiences in gaming, as they also might in real life. The difference is we're not there with them. We don't know the people. It's not the school community. It could be anybody, etc. So that's why it's the most important thing is really pay attention to your kid's mood and their affect. And if Fortnite starts to become their entire world, then you got, I think, that's the next conversation if you want to go there.
Thank you so much. So you both have been flooding us with tips and strategies throughout this whole conversation, but I want to give us a chance to do a round robin, real deep dive focus on tips for parents, because we are hungry for them. And a lot of the questions are asking about specific strategies that parents can use to gain knowledge, to learn more about the technology that our kids are learning, are using, and to draw boundaries. So I'd like to play a tip game where one of us throws out some tips and someone else says something they like and something they might be curious about or question around the tip. And it can be tips for kids, tips for parents, and let's add tips going into this summer, another unprecedented summer at its easiest. So I'll start. Something that we're doing in our home is that we have what's called no screen days. Now, that's a little misleading because there are times when our kids are using technology for school. But on those days after school, they know that there is no more screen time. So that's something I might recommend that parents try if they're feeling like there's too much technology use in the home. Michael, what's something you like about that strategy and something that you would caution about?
What I like about the strategy is that turning off the screens allows us to lower our hyperstimulation. These screens get us excited, as Catherine said, because they stimulate us. They keep pushing us, and keep making us feel great about things, or frustrated enough that we work to feel great. And I think that that's a good thing. I do worry about taking a negative approach. And I would, instead of, for example, I say screen time limits are obsolete, right? That screen time limits actually didn't even work during the era of television because it made it the forbidden fruit. And these kids would rush home and, they sit down for their hour of allotted time, and nothing at the end of the hour, nothing would happen. An hour and 15 minutes later, mom would come up and point at the watch and say, you've got homework to do. And it would become a conflict every time. I think we should turn this around and have other activity time limits. In other words, let's talk about the positives that happen when we have the screens off. And I'll throw one thing out here that really is controversial, which is I think we have to bring back boredom. I think we have to give kids the space to say, what am I going to do now? And our response should be, great, go outside or whatever. Kids don't lie on their backs in the grass and make shapes out of the clouds anymore. And the reality is that boredom is the womb of creativity and imagination, not just because it gives you the space to do it in, but because it's a little uncomfortable and you fill it with the new. And instead, we've gotten into a very bad habit of stimulating ourselves with whatever comes over the airwaves at us.
So instead of Tuesday no screen day, it should be Tuesday boredom day at the Ray Malorio's house. I'm just kidding. It can be cloud day.
Or Tuesday painting day, or Tuesday, scavenger hunt day. I mean, I would just say that kids do much better with a strengths-based approach than with a risk or negative-based approach.
I love that. Great. And Michael, now it's your turn. Give us a tip we haven't heard yet, and then Catherine will respond.
I am often asked when kids should learn digital literacy, digital, citizenship, et cetera. And I say the moment they start using digital devices. We have a bad habit of tossing our smartphones at our 2-year-olds to keep them quiet. And so I think that the tip I would give is for us all to believe and to teach our children that these are power tools, that these are tools just like an electric saw or an automobile is. And just as we wouldn't hand an electric saw to a 4-year-old or toss her the keys to the car and say, have at it, we should think very seriously about that device, such as a tablet or a laptop or a smartphone, and say, is this a tool that the child needs? Is this a tool that the child can handle responsibly and respectfully? And that means respecting herself and others in the process. And when they meet those criteria, we teach them to use it. We do sit beside them. Just as we sit in the front seat of the car, white knuckled while our child drives for the first time. And here's the thing, when we teach you to use a saw, we don't say, don't cut your hand off. When we teach you to drive, we say, don't run over. We don't say, don't run over people. We teach kids to master these tools. And in the process, they learn to be safe and healthy. And so this is why I argue with all of the well-intentioned people in the tech world who are all about internet safety. And I say, you've got to stop talking about internet safety because it presumes the internet is unsafe. And it means we enter it in a defensive stance or not. And frankly, that is what is actually kind of exciting for the kids. It's kind of, it's like what smoking used to be. When smoking was dangerous and adult-like, it was very attractive to kids. When it became just stupid, it became less attractive. And so even the idea of having parental controls, I push back against, because there's no kid on the face of the earth who wants to be controlled by their parents. So we should be talking about parental engagement.
Okay, great. Catherine, what resonates strongly with you around Michael's power tools analogy? What do you like and what would you caution against?
I like everything he said. I just wouldn't give them the power too young.
Okay.
I think that's the biggest risk. You put a smartphone over a toddler on the changing table, they go into the zone. And there you go. That is not a pacifier. We have to teach our kids to self-soothe. It's our tone of voice. And I think, I guess it's not a disagreement. I think Michael and I really see this very much the same way. It is so important to talk to your kids about what is this for, what is it not for. Assume they're going to screw up, help them, figure it out, clean it up, etc. But just don't give it to them too much when they're too young. And I think that is the hardest thing, because it just works so well. It just works so well to distract your kids.
It does.
I can't
Great. And Catherine, it's your turn. Give us a tip we haven't heard yet.
Well, I'm going back to the hundreds of people who had questions about Fortnite because I had one of those boys. And that's actually what propelled me to write the book. There was no research on all of this in 2011, 12, 13 when I was doing the research for the book. My tip is if you have a kid who loves gaming and looks like a gifted gamer, the tip I would say to you is move them beyond just gaming. Get them into creating content, get them into robotics teams, get them into creating apps, make it something that they really are learning about and creating so that they don't just get caught in the rabbit hole of just playing games in a way that will tamp down their capacity to really develop great new things. But you have to expose them to people who are doing that. So get them on a team building together, not just playing the game, but creating them and real life applications of gaming to solving the world's problems. That's my tip.
Great. Thank you so much. That resonates strongly with me. And I'll say, something I love about that is that it's possible for a gaming culture to exist in a home and in a family for a child, and also model that other things and those skills can be used toward positive development and well-being in other ways too. So it gives parents an option. It doesn't feel like it has to be all or nothing. The thing I would caution parents to think about is that it might be challenging, especially for, use your words, gifted gamers, to kind of pull back at all in the beginning, right? So you might have to not physically force your child to go to robotics camp, but drive them there, right? Like work really hard. There might need to be a few days when they say, no, absolutely not. That's a terrible idea. And we just have to stick with it, right? Especially if we have one of those kids. Great. So you all,
about that, Danielle,
please go ahead.
What I often find is that the most gifted gamers get to a point where they get frustrated with the games because the games aren't good enough, right? That they are better than the games. And that is a great way to guide them into coding themselves, into creating themselves. And frankly, even the really good ones get bored with the games after a while because they are algorithms that they figure out, and then there's no challenge anymore. So I think that the approach to this is not to put a brick wall in front of them to stop them, but to use a martial arts approach and redirect their energy. Take that energy, including the negative energy of this isn't good enough, and channel it into something more productive.
That's great. Excellent. And in the interest of time, I really do want to get to parents' questions, but I'd like to leave a chance for each of you to give one more specific tip to parents. And specifically, I'd like to focus it on the summer, because we're all, we're definitely thinking about what this summer is going to be like. We all had kind of drastically different experiences last summer than we had ever had in our lives. And we've had a year of really technology connected home life. So I wonder if you can give some strategies for how parents can think about this summer, knowing that camps are not going to be open in the same way they were before, but we have some more options this year than we did last year. How should we be thinking about technology this summer? And Catherine, I'll come to you first.
Oh, such an important question. I guess I'd start first with sort of just remembering that summer is a state of mind. Michael alluded this to a little bit, looking at the clouds, staring at the stars, constellations. Summer is a time in children's lives where they're not being assessed. They're not being evaluated. Teachers aren't grading them. It is so important that children have in the summer, whether it's a hammock outside or a hammock in your apartment, time just to lie down, to muse, to wonder, what Michael was saying about boredom. I don't think it's a radical thing you said, Michael. I think it's an essential thing. Summer is the time where children discover their own luscious creativity and their curiosity about the world that they're growing up in. It's the time of tide pools, which you can go to even if you can't go to camp, or just exploring. And in any kind of way, it's a time of reconnecting with their capacity for solitude and really connecting to yourself. And most of all, I would say about summer, I mean, camps obviously are divine. I know California is going through some tricky times right now as a state about camping, but for those kids who do have the opportunity to go to camp, you know, there's nothing like camp to catch up for social and emotional growth and development. But the one of the things we are seeing a decline in right now in kids that is challenging because of screens and because of the way screens grab their attention, because of the way their whole lives are on screens, is their development capacity for solitude and for intrinsically motivated play. And when you play dress up on an iPad, the iPad does all the creating for you. You're sitting on your butt, you're pushing a button, it's sexist, it's stereotypes. When you play dress up in the summer, in your own, kitchen or your backyard or out in nature, you are developing so many of the aspects of learning, creativity, and growth, storytelling, literacy, fine motor coordination, all sorts of stuff. So you want kids playing. You want them playing and playing in their own imaginations. And summer's so important to children. And the reason we give them a break for the summer is because they need that break. And the last thing I'll say is that one of the most effective ways to help kids who have been on screens a lot or to digitally detox is to be in nature. And we all heal ourselves in nature. And most people now will be able to go for walks outside. We'll be able to just be outside, play outside, ride your bike outside. And I would say think very carefully about expanding the amount of time that you can have this summer for your children as well as with your children and for yourself in nature with no devices. You don't need to bring your phone if you're on a walk with your kids. They're right there.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I'm feeling guilty for having brought my phone on my walk with my son earlier today. And yet, good news, tomorrow's another day.
No.
Michael, no, thank you so much. Great suggestions there. And Michael, what do you recommend to parents as we go into another pandemic summer and coming off of a year of a lot of technology absorption at home?
Well, I can't emphasize enough what Catherine said, particularly the part about nature. Nature is not just calming, but nature is implacable, and nature is infinitely variable, which I think is really important. And so even if we can't go to camp, we can camp. And we can learn how to set a tent up and keep dry at night. We can learn how to cook a meal, how to start a fire, how to do a lot of things. And I think that kind of basic skills building and basic building of one's self-reliance, one's self-confidence from the inside out is really important. And the other thing that nature teaches us to do is to observe carefully, to really understand what's going on, to watch the clouds rolling in and understand that a storm may be coming, or just to take a moment and see a sunset. I had what I found to be a horrifying moment a few months ago when I was out on the street in front of the hospital, and everybody on the street was staring at their smartphones, and there was a brilliant sunset that no one saw. Right. And so I think that we need to take a moment to re-enter the world, not through screens, but through reality, and understand also that the world gives us senses that the screens don't. The screens do sound and image, but there are other senses that they don't do. You can't taste through a screen. You can't smell through a screen. And you certainly can't pick up the vibes of another person that are so essential in face-to-face interaction. And I will say that this summer will be different than last summer. This summer, we will have a lot of people vaccinated, and we will be able to know who we can interact with. And I think it's really important to find out what the vaccination status is of those people you care about the most and rejoin with them. Build our pods out in safe ways, but be very mindful and conscious about it and understand that we're not dealing with a faceless, nameless problem here. We have a solution to the problem. We know that it can be managed with thoughtfulness and care.
Great. Thank you both so much. This has been an amazing conversation. I have learned so much. I could go on and ask you to drill down into pretty much every single thing you've said tonight. And we have already gotten to some of parents' questions, but I definitely want to give us a chance to go even deeper because questions are just flooding in, which shows the interest in the topic we're talking about tonight. So I'd like to start with one selfishly that I have been deeply impacted by in my home, which is a certain type of technology. It is YouTube, the wild world of YouTube, and especially as we've talked so much about video games, the world of people playing video games and kids and adults alike watching people play games, so online streaming. What is your take on this, and should parents be concerned about it, or is it okay if this is something that is alive and well and maybe even something that our kids would choose to do if we didn't limit it and might be even on the border of obsessed with? Catherine, I'll come to you first.
Well, I think the border of obsessed, if you think about what it was like for you as a teenager, you might have been obsessed with, well, I might have been obsessed with the Beatles, or it's an age of obsession, and it's an age of wanting to be cool and wanting to know what's what and who's cool and who's etc. And YouTube, I mean, watch The Social Dilemma to really get clear about the interaction between your kid, yourself, anybody, and YouTube and endless streaming. But I think it serves different functions. And again, I think, the thing you want to think about is what is the function and the purpose? Because if kids are enjoying something that's fun and not harmful on YouTube, or they're learning something on YouTube, that's one thing. If they're spending mindless hours and avoiding life and avoiding chores or avoiding homework or being grumpy and antisocial or having a hard time, and they're stuck in the world of YouTube, then I think you have to set limits. And,
That's great.
I think, I believe in limits. And I have seen parents use things like family pack, family time, circle with their kids in partnership to set times, to use tech to basically, to outsmart your smartphone, to set some limits. And I think that, that can be very helpful. And there's some kids, I think, who respond to that very well, especially if they get to pick and choose some of when they are and aren't on.
Great. And actually, Michael, in the interest of time, I want to come to you with a question about limits that Catherine gave a nice bridge to. A lot of parents are asking about how specifically we can navigate the world of limits, given that, you mentioned a lot that you don't like to talk about specific amounts of screen time. Yet a lot of us are using screen time as a reward system in our home, like, finish your stuff, get a certain amount of screen time. Do you think this is a bad idea? Is it okay for us to do this? What's your take on those kinds of limits?
Well, first of all, I'll just on one side, I will say it is not a good idea to use screen time as either a reward or a punishment in its taken away, unless it's for abuse of their screen time. right?
Right.
In other words, you don't give them a smartphone because they get straight A's, or take their Facebook account away because they were punching their brother, whatever. But to take a step back, what we feel that the research shows, and actually what has worked well clinically for us, is to completely upend the paradigm of screen time and sit down with your child of virtually any age and think of their 24-hour day as an empty glass, that they fill up with this many hours of sleep. And let's remember that when they become teenagers, they need more sleep than they did when they were younger. You have a sit-down family meal every day without any devices. Most critical thing, not just for their nutrition, but for their mental health. You ask them, how much homework do you typically have? What do you like to do? You like to play basketball? Okay, let's put some time aside for basketball. Let's put some time aside for the homework. Let's get the priorities of your life taken care of first. Not my priorities for you, but your priorities for you, the child. And then let's see what time is left. And so what you're doing there is a couple of things. Number one is you're giving them control and ownership over that decision. And they're doing it mindfully, not just turning on the screen and disappearing into it, right? They're thinking about it. They are remembering that they like to play basketball, that they like to hang out with their friends, that they like to do things like this. And you are helping them prioritize the things that are important away from the siren call of the screen. And also what you're teaching them right from the beginning is time management, which God knows we could all do better at. And that comes back to our own use of screens, which is we have to remember that we are not only separating ourselves from our children when we are using our screens, but we're modeling for them the behavior that we expect them to have as adults.
Thank you. All right. 2 things that we can do on a screen and another way, but there's no doubt our kids are doing these on screens. What's your take on books and music through technology? Love it, foster an amazing cultural experience in the home, and when does it get too far? Michael, you first.
I think that, frankly, that old-fashioned books have something going on more than a Kindle does. And what they have going on is the tactile experience of it, the smell of books, the portability, and yes, Kindles are very portable, but the reality is that there's some weight to a book, not just physical weight, but weight as in you see your progress through that book. And so I think that we give up a lot if we just go with the Kindle and just deal with it as information transfer. The other thing that they do really well, the electronic books do really well, is they have definitions and annotations and footnotes and stuff that you can go to easily. And it's easy to lose the flow of the book when you're busy checking out each of these rabbit warrens that it leads into. So that's one thing. Music. Music is a very sensual experience. And there is an attenuated sensuality to screens. They can do amazing things. And yes, you can sit and play your cello with Yo-Yo Ma if you have him on the screen and you're playing your cello, but you're not really experiencing the full body of music if you're not feeling that vibration of the wooden body against you, etc. So I think that they expand our horizons, but they can't replace them.
Yeah, great. So it sounds like you might encourage parents, if we're playing a song, to not play that video on Vimeo, which will inherently bring up a video, which is a different experience than if we can just have it playing in an auditory way in our homes.
You remember when MTV first started and we started having videos with songs. And I actually felt a great sense of loss because I had images happening in my head that were different than those images.
Yeah.
And we lose that when someone else feeds it to us.
Danielle, I want to add a little bit and
yes,
what Michael said.
Please do.
Bring some research here. So what we
please do, and then we'll have time for one more question just to give everyone a heads up.
Because this is a
Go ahead.
K-8 families primarily. I want to
Mhm.
cite some of Marianne Wolf's book from Reader Come Home, which talks about the development of the reading brain and why reading from books is so different from reading on a Kindle, especially when your kids are under the age of 10, for the following reasons. When you read from a book, you are basically telling a story to yourself in your head, right? If you're reading silently to yourself. What we know is when we read on the Kindle, our tone of voice is not as rich. It's not as affectively charged because the font disrupts emotional connection. We read faster, we race to the periphery. Um, you can go back and look, but it's also really annoying to go back. Like I forget what happened on page one. So we don't do that as well. But one of the most important things is when people are little and we read to them, we're dialoguing with them. Are you my runaway bunny? Yes, you are my runaway bunny. As they get older, when we're talking, we are empathizing. And one of the most important things that books give children up into the age of, for all of us, we read books, is it teaches them how to empathize. It increases their social emotional intelligence, and it helps them with their moral development. We try characters on for size. We wonder, why did that person do that? Why did they feel that way? And nothing can replace the richness of those aspects of the benefits of reading. Technology can't do it. And with little people, Marianne calls it the grandmother phenomenon. When you are in the lap of somebody and you're holding that tactile book and someone's reading and cueing with you, this is how we develop language literacy, the love of learning, and really our connections to people all over. And ending up where we started, we are a social, species, and literature is one of the most profound ways to connect and learn.
Laps
Beautiful.
quicker than apps.
I love it. Thank you so much. And Shelley put the link to Marianne Wolf's book in the chat for anyone who would like to follow up. That's an excellent segue into a question that a lot of parents are asking, which is, do you two have go-to resources? Well, I'm sure you do. Please share with us resources that you have where parents can learn more about two main things: how to understand technology and brain development if we want to have conversations with our kids about how technology might interact with their developing brains. And then also if we want to find out more about how to navigate technology in the home. So Michael, what resources do you recommend to parents?
Well, at the risk of plugging my own work, we have put close to 20 years into developing at the Digital Wellness Lab a resource base at our website at digitalwellnesslab.org that has a whole channel just for parents. It also has them for clinicians, for researchers, and for teachers. But I would point specifically to something that's really useful, which is that we have something called the Family Digital Wellness Guide, which we actually have updated since the pandemic and the changes and accelerations and amplifications it has brought upon us. And what it does is it goes through the stages of human development, literally from infancy to young adulthood, and talks about the developmental tasks of that stage of life, how screens interface with that in positive and negative ways, and even ways to manage it and even to talk about it with your kids. A lot of parents feel very awkward talking to their kids about the internet, more awkward than they feel talking about sex to their kids, because rightly or wrongly, they think they know something about sex, but they know nothing about the internet. So they feel very uncomfortable. But it even has things in there called icebreakers, which are how to talk to your kids and even how to talk to your own parents when you drop your baby off at the grandparents' house and they're ready to plop them in front of the TV. So I would point people to that, the Family Digital Wellness Guide, and ask that they contribute in their questions, their solutions, because this is something we can crowdsource. We are figuring this out together.
Great. And a link to the Digital Wellness Guide is also in the chat now. Catherine, what are your go-to resources for parents if we want to have conversations about the neuroscience of technology use and or how to navigate this crazy time?
Well, I think Michael Center is fabulous. And I just want to say I'm a huge fan, and it's certainly one of my go-to places. I think the Center for Humane Technology has recently creating some really good content for parents. And if you have not seen the movie The Social Dilemma, I highly recommend it because it will teach you what you want to know to be able to talk to your children. And certainly your middle school kids can watch that film. You can decide what's appropriate for your children, but it will teach you a great deal. And their resources for parents are very good. The Family Online Safety Institute, FOSI, is a good place if you're concerned about privacy and sort of how to keep your kids safe. Safety Net, Connect Safely, those are all also good sites. I think Wait Until 8th has some very good research on it. It's a parent-run organization. I'm on their advisory board. I have to say that. And it has some very good information about the reasons to be very thoughtful about how you introduce your child to a smartphone and the way to set up the kinds of family agreement plans. We used to say contract sounds so litigious, and like Michael, I try and take a tech positive approach to these, but let's have a family agreement. And by the way, when you make your family agreement, make sure your kids get to set limits on you.
Yes.
That's so important. It has to be reciprocal, and those quarters go in the jar for parents' quarters and kids' quarters, or whatever you do when you call somebody out. Common Sense Media is a site some people find helpful. Some of their ratings, and I think are not it's a resource to figure out what sort of what games are appropriate and to read about what games are appropriate, etc. The Child Mind Institute of New York, I think, puts on a very good content for teachers, for parents. When you're worried about your kids, you want to look for the kinds of things that Michael referred to that are beneath sort of the gaming, kids who are obsessed about gaming. When you're looking for soft signs of anxiety, depression, social anxiety, OCD, oppositional behavior, some of the things that we see in kids, but we only see them through the lens of gaming or their difficult relationships to technology, which is such a coping mechanism for those kids. We have to look at unhealthy tech use as a coping mechanism, not the source of the problem. And CMI, I think, has some very good, very helpful advice for teachers, parents, and kids. Their series of what I wish I'd known at my younger self. I forget exactly what it's called, but they have all these cool actors and actresses, and Emma Stone and Lena Dunham, and all these people talking about their anxiety disorders, talking about their depression, talking about their struggles. And it actually can help kids who are confused about their experiences in life understand themselves better. So those are some resources I would recommend.
Outstanding. Thank you both so much for taking the time to speak to us tonight, especially given that I know you're both on East Coast time. It's quite late your time. And I think it's fair to say, for what it's worth, that this has been the most immediately impactful conversation I have ever moderated. I am going to go right now, find a basket, put my smartphone into it, and have a mindful, technology-free dinner with my family. Thank you so much. And for everyone who's listening, we will be compiling not only the talk tonight, which was recorded, but also the list of resources that Michael and Catherine mentioned, as well as some that I also suggest, into a follow-up that all registrants for this webinar will receive. So look for that in your inboxes. And I know a lot of our schools are going to continue this conversation in parent and school facilitated conversations, because this has just stimulated so much for many of us. I am so grateful for your time. Good night, Catherine, Michael. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night, Danielle. Thank you so much.
So are we going away or are we staying around?